Hey guys, good morning. Welcome to week number 3, lesson number 5 for Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. If you remember in the last video, I assigned you homework to read up to a certain point in chapter 3. And so if you haven't done that yet, please go to the last video, read up to that point, and then we can begin the reading for this video. If you go into the video description right below, there's a link in there, and in that link you can go right to the book on Project Gutenberg, on the Project Gutenberg files. It opens up right in your browser, and when you get in there you can press Control F. So remember, we press the Control key down, hold it, and press F, and then you can type in if quote mark, so quotation, if you wish to. Okay, so quotation, if you wish to, and that will take you to the place we're at for our reading today. I also want to remind you guys at the beginning of the video that to be included for the YouTube drawing every week in order to win a $25 gift card, all you gotta do is watch these videos and complete the homework for me. You can show me that you completed the homework by sending it to me through email or by showing up to my Zoom calls any morning from 8:30 to 9 a.m. or any afternoon from 2 to 2:30 p.m. Or I guess by any morning or afternoon, I specifically mean Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays when we do our Zoom calls as a school. So show up there, show me the work, or send it to me in an email, and I will put you down on that list to win the $25 gift card. Okay, cool. We're going to try and get a good amount of reading done today, try and push forward in the story. As you can see, Peter and Wendy have been talking. We've now had the introduction to Peter Pan as a true speaking character, and it's only going to get better from here, guys. So, let's continue. Here we go! Middle of chapter 3, we'll pick up where it says, "It's like this. She kissed him." So Wendy kisses Peter. "Funny," said Peter gravely. "Now I shall give you a thimble?" "If you wish to," said Wendy, keeping her head erect this time. Peter thimbled her, and almost immediately she screeched, "What is it, Wendy?" "It was exactly as if someone were pulling my hair." "That must have been Tink," Peter said. "I never knew her so naughty before." And indeed, Tink was darting about again, using offensive language. "She says she will do that to you, Wendy, every time I give you a thimble." "But why?" "Well, why, Tink?" said Peter. Again, Tink replied, "You silly ass." Sometimes they swear. Peter could not understand why, but Wendy understood, and she was just slightly disappointed when he admitted that he came to the nursery window not to see her, but to listen to stories. "You see," Peter said, "I don't know any stories. None of the Lost Boys knows any stories." "How perfectly awful," Wendy said. "Do you know," Peter asked, "why swallows build in the eaves of houses? It is to listen to the stories." "Oh, Wendy, your mother was telling you such a lovely story." "Which story was it?" "About the prince who couldn't find the lady who wore the glass slipper." "Peter," said Wendy excitedly, "that was Cinderella, and he found her, and they lived happily ever after." Peter was so glad that he rose from the floor where they had been sitting and hurried to the window. "Where are you going?" she cried with misgiving. "To tell the other boys." "Don't go, Peter," she entreated. "I know such lots of stories." Those were her precise words, so there can be no denying that it was she who first tempted him. He came back, and there was a greedy look in his eyes now which ought to have alarmed her, but it didn't. "Oh, the stories I could tell to the boys," she cried, and then Peter gripped her and began to draw her towards the window. "Let me go," she ordered him. "Wendy, do come with me and tell the other boys." Of course she was very pleased to be asked, but she said, "Oh dear, I can't, Peter. Think of Mummy. Besides, I can't fly." "I'll teach you," Peter said. "Oh, how lovely to fly." "I'll teach you how to jump on the wind's back, and then shoo, away we go." "Ooh," she exclaimed. Wendy, when you're sleeping in your silly bed, you might be flying about with me saying funny things to the stars." "Ooh, and Wendy, there are mermaids." "Mermaids? With tails?" "Such long tails," Peter said. "Oh," cried Wendy, "to see a mermaid." He had become frightfully cunning. "Wendy," he said, how we should all respect you." She was wriggling her body in distress. It was quite as if she were trying to remain on the nursery floor, but he had no pity for her. "Wendy," he said, the sly one, "you could tuck us in at night." "Ooh, none of us has ever been tucked in at night." And her arms went out to him. "And you could darn our clothes and make pockets for us. None of us has any pockets." How could she resist? "Of course, it's awfully fascinating," she cried. "Peter, would you teach John and Michael to fly too?" "If you like," he said indifferently, and she ran to John and Michael and shook them. "Wake up," she cried. "Peter Pan has come, and he is to teach us to fly." John rubbed his eyes. "Then I shall get up," he said. Of course, he was on the floor already. "Hello," he said. "I'm up." Michael was up by this time also, looking as sharp as a knife with 6 blades and a saw. But Peter suddenly signed silence. He went, "Shh." Their faces assumed the awful craftiness of children listening for sounds from the grown-up world. All was as still as salt. Then everything was right. No, stop! Everything was wrong. Nana, who had been barking distressfully all the evening, was quiet now. It was their silence that they had heard. "Out with the light! Hide, quick!" cried John, taking command for the only time throughout the whole adventure. And thus, when Liza entered, holding Nana, the nursery seemed quite its old self, very dark. You would have sworn you heard its 3 wicked inmates breathing angelically as they slept. They were really doing it artfully from behind the window curtains. Liza was in a bad temper. She was mixing the Christmas puddings in the kitchen and had been drawn from them with a raisin still on her cheek by Nana's absurd suspicions. She thought the best way of getting a little quiet was to take Nana to the nursery for a moment, but in custody, of course. "There, you suspicious brute," she said, not sorry that Nana was in disgrace. "They are perfectly safe, aren't they? Every one of the little angels are sound asleep in bed. Listen to their gentle breathing." Here, Michael, encouraged by his success, breathed so loudly that they were actually nearly detected. Nana knew that kind of breathing, and she tried to drag herself out of Liza's clutches. But Liza was dense. "No more of it, Nana," she said sternly, pulling her out of the room. "I warn you, if you bark again, I shall go straight for Master and Mrs. and bring them home from the party. And then, oh, won't Master whip you just." She tied the unhappy dog up again. But do you think Nana ceased to bark? Bring Master and Mrs. home from the party? Why, that's just what she wanted. Do you think she cared whether she was whipped so long as her charges were safe? Unfortunately, Liza returned to her puddings, and Nana, seeing that no help would come from her, strained and strained at the chain until at last she broke it. In another moment, she had burst into the dining room of 27 and flung up her paws to heaven, her most expressive way of making a communication. Mr. and Mrs. Darling knew at once that something terrible was happening in their nursery, and without a goodbye to their hostess, they rushed into the street. So, remember earlier in the book, Mr. and Mrs. Darling were discussing, and I guess Nana was part of the discussion, although silently, how they deeply wished that they had done everything else right that night. They did things wrong, and they blamed themselves for the children leaving. Well, here, as readers, we're able to see inside of the story, inside of a part that Mr. and Mrs. Darling don't know about, and know that more was going on than just the kids being upset at Mr. Darling or something like that. You know, in reality, the kids did want to stay, but Mr. and Mrs. Darling were going to go out regardless, and the kids were going to be tricked by Peter Pan regardless. Or, I guess convinced is the better word, because Peter's a pretty nice kid. He's just a kid. Okay, let's continue. But it was now 10 minutes since 3 scoundrels had been breathing behind the curtains, and Peter Pan can do a great deal in 10 minutes. We now return to the nursery. "It's all right," John announced, emerging from his hiding place. "I say, Peter, can you really fly?" Instead of troubling to answer him, Peter flew around the room, taking the mantelpiece on the way. "How topping," said John and Michael. "How sweet," cried Wendy. "Yes, I'm sweet. Oh, I am sweet," said Peter, forgetting his manners again. It looked delightfully easy, and they tried it for the first from the floor and then from the beds, but they always went back down instead of just up. "I say, how do you do it?" asked John, rubbing his knee. He was quite a practical boy. "You just think lovely, wonderful thoughts," Peter explained, "and they lift you up in the air." He showed them again. You're so nippy at it, John said. Couldn't you do it very slowly, just once? Peter did it both slowly and quickly. I've got it now, Wendy, cried John, but soon he found that he had not. Not one of them could actually fly an inch, though even Michael was in words of 2 syllables, and Peter did not know A from Z. Of course, Peter had been trifling with them, for no one can fly unless the fairy dust has been blown on him. Fortunately, as we have mentioned, one of his hands was messy with it, and he blew some on each of them with the most superb results. Now, he said, just wiggle your shoulders this way and let go. They were all on their beds, and gallant Michael let go first. He did not quite mean to let go, but he did it, and immediately he was borne across the room. I flewed, he screamed while still in midair. John let go and met Wendy near the bathroom. Oh, lovely! Oh, ripping! Look at me! Look at me! Look at me! They were not nearly so elegant as Peter. He could not help kicking a little, but their heads were bobbing against the ceiling, and there's almost nothing so delicious as that. Peter gave Wendy a hand at first, but had to desist. Tink was so indignant. So as we can see, Tinkerbell, or Tink, is quite jealous of Peter helping Wendy. Jealousy is a theme, actually, in this book, and as we read further, we're going to be covering ideas about jealousy as they pop up, and wondering whether jealousy makes us better or worse, whether jealousy is just a trait of childhood, or can grown-ups be jealous too, and is that something that maybe we should work on, or something that we should let happen? We'll find out as time goes on. Up and down they went, and round and round. Heavenly was Wendy's word. I say, cried John, why shouldn't we all go out? Of course it was to this that Peter had been luring them. Michael was ready. He wanted to see how long it took him to do 1 billion miles. But Wendy hesitated. Mermaids, said Peter again. Ooh, and there are pirates. Pirates, cried John, seizing his Sunday hat. Let us go at once. It was just at this moment that Mr. and Mrs. Darling hurried with Nana out of 27. They ran into the middle of the street to look up at the nursery window, and yes, it was still shut, but the room was ablaze with light, and the most heart-gripping sight of all, they could see in shadow on the curtain 3 little figures in night attire circling round and round, not on the floor, but in the air. Wait, not 3 figures, 4! In a tremble, they opened the street door. Mr. Darling would have rushed upstairs, but Mrs. Darling signed him to go softly. She even tried to make her heart go softly. Will they reach the nursery in time? If so, how delightful for them, and we shall all breathe a sigh of relief, but there would be no story. On the other hand, if they're not in time, I solemnly promise that it will all come right in the end. They would have reached the nursery in time had it not been that the little stars were watching them. Once again, the stars blew the window open, and that the smallest star of all called out, Cave, Peter! Then Peter knew that there was not a moment to lose. Come, he cried imperiously, and soared out of the window at once into the night, followed by John and Michael and Wendy. Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana rushed into the nursery too late. The birds were flown. That's the end of chapter 3, and that's where we're going to be leaving off reading for today. For chapter 4, or for homework, I'd like you to begin reading chapter 4, and it's a decently short chapter, so if you could just read the entire thing, that would be great. Chapter 4 is titled The Flight, Second Star to the Right and Straight On Till Morning. This is a pretty cool and iconic chapter, a big part of what Disney took away from Peter Pan and brought to their own movie, so it'll be a good one to read. And for the homework, in order to prove that you read it, please write me a brief summary on the chapter, explaining a little bit about what you read. If you notice any symbols or themes inside of the chapter, please bring those up too. And if there's anything else that you notice that's quite interesting besides just what happened, tell me about it. Tell me why you like it, or why you find it fascinating, or what critical interpretation you're having. I'm leaving some of these homework assignments a little open-ended because I'm encouraging you guys to bring as much creativity to your answers as you can. In a classroom setting, we have this beautiful dynamic where I get to speak and read and then talk a little, and you guys can then talk and maybe teach me some things that you've been thinking, and then someone else speaks, and then as a classroom, in the moment, we come together to some beautiful conclusions, and some really interesting knowledge about the book that we're reading, or any ideas that we're exploring. Unfortunately, in this setting, it's mostly just me speaking, and so there are two ways that I'm finding that are going to make that magical dynamic that we have in the classroom happen here as well. The first one is if you do come to the Zoom meetings from 8:30 to 9 a.m. every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, because that's where we can sit and talk about the book and have that really, really cool discussion. The second way is if you guys have these open-ended homework assignments that allow you to, one, summarize some things, and two, add all of those extra critical, magical, wonderful thoughts and insights that you guys come up with. By doing that, it's almost like you're having the conversation with me anyway. So I really look forward to your guys' responses, and as a little bit of an extra credit thing, if you want, you can look up what does it mean to break the fourth wall in literature. You can Google that and try and find out exactly what the answer is. And as for a little hint, in the last, say, 4 paragraphs of chapter 3, J.M. Barrie breaks the fourth wall. So if you already know what that means, cool. If you don't know what it means, feel free to look it up and maybe add that to your homework, an explanation of what it means to break the fourth wall in literature. If you have any questions for me, please send me an email or hop onto my Zoom hours from 8:30 to 9 a.m. or 2 to 2:30 p.m. on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I'm really glad you guys have been watching these videos. Please tell all of your other PS Academy student peers to watch the videos if they can, and keep coming back because we're learning some great stuff here. All right, till next time, see you guys later. Have a wonderful day.